The coffee stain on his jacket had been there for 3 days. Daniel noticed it again as he pushed through the heavy glass doors of Central Station, the same doors he'd been walking through every morning for the past 2.5 months. Funny how nobody looked twice at a man in wrinkled clothes and scuffed sneakers, even if that man had enough money in his bank account to buy the entire train station 10 times over. 61 years old, and this was the freest he'd felt in decades. The morning rush was in full swing. Thousands of people moved like a river around him. Everyone headed somewhere important, everyone checking their phones, everyone lost in their own little world. Daniel pulled his baseball cap lower over his eyes and adjusted the thick glasses perched on his nose. The gray beard he'd been growing helped too. 3 months ago, his face was on the cover of Business Weekly magazine. Now he was invisible, just another tired guy trying to get through the day. That's exactly what he wanted. He'd left everything behind without much explanation. His assistant probably still wondered why he'd suddenly decided on an extended personal retreat. His board of directors had been furious at first, though they couldn't exactly fire the man who owned 60% of the company. His penthouse apartment sat empty, 30 floors above the city, collecting dust. The cars in his garage hadn't moved. The chef he employed had taken an unexpected paid vacation. Daniel had walked, away from $3 billion like it was a coat he'd hung up at the door. Now he lived in a small studio apartment in a neighborhood where nobody knew his name. He took the train. He bought his own coffee. He did his own laundry at the laundromat down the street. And last week he'd actually had a conversation with the lady who ran it about fabric softener. A real conversation, not the kind where someone wanted something from him. The station's main hall opened up before him, all echoing space and morning light filtering through the high windows. He'd walked through this exact spot probably 70 times by now, and it still caught him off guard how beautiful it was when you actually looked. Most people never did. They were too busy rushing. That's when he saw the piano. Well, he'd seen it before. Every single day, actually. The big black grand piano sitting right there in the middle of everything, like an island in a stream of people. There was a handmade sign taped to it that said, "Play me, I'm yours," in cheerful letters. Sometimes people would sit down and peck out chopsticks or the beginning of some pop song before getting embarrassed and hurrying away. Mostly it just sat there, ignored. But today something felt different. Daniel stopped walking. People flowed around him, annoyed at the obstacle, but he didn't move. He just stood there, staring at that piano like he was seeing it for the first time his wife used to play. God, could she play? Catherine had been a concert pianist before they met, before his tech company took off, before money changed everything. She used to say that music was the only language that didn't lie. You couldn't fake emotion at a piano. Your fingers either told the truth or they told nothing at all. She'd been gone for 2 years now. Cancer didn't care how much money you had. Daniel felt his feet moving before his brain caught up. His backpack, the cheap one he'd bought at a discount store, slid off his shoulder as he approached the piano bench. A couple of commuters glanced over with mild curiosity, then went back to their phones. A teenager with headphones in didn't even look up. He sat down slowly, the bench creaking a little under his weight. The piano was beautiful up close. Someone took care of it, kept it polished. His reflection stared back at him from the shiny black surface. This stranger with a beard and glasses who used to run board meetings and make decisions that affected thousands of employees. His hands hovered over the keys. They were shaking a little. When was the last time he'd actually played? 5 years? 10? Catherine had tried to teach him over the years, patient as a saint, but he'd always been too busy. Too many meetings. Too many deals. Too many things that seemed important at the time and now felt completely meaningless. He pressed down on middle C. The note rang out, clear and pure, cutting through the noise of the station like a bell. A woman nearby looked over, surprised. Daniel pressed another key, then another. His fingers remembered more than he thought they would. In their last year together, when Catherine was sick but still strong enough to sit at their piano at home, she'd become obsessed with something. Old music, she called it. Forgotten pieces that nobody played anymore. Composers who died without recognition. Their work buried in dusty archives and forgotten library collections. She'd spent hours digging through old sheet music, playing these lost songs, bringing them back to life in their living room. Someone should remember them, she'd said once. Her fingers dancing over the keys even as the illness stole her strength bit by bit. These songs deserved to be heard. Daniel had found all her music after she passed. Boxes and boxes of it, carefully organized, each piece marked with her handwritten notes. He'd meant to do something with it, honor her somehow. But then he'd just gotten lost in the numbness of grief and work and more grief. But he'd brought one piece with him when he'd walked away from his old life. Just one. It was folded up in his backpack right now, the paper soft from being handled so many times. A song by someone named Friedrich Miller, a German composer who died broken forgotten in 1959. Catherine had been obsessed with this particular piece. She'd played it over and over, always saying it was the most beautiful thing nobody had ever heard. Moonlit Reverie, it was called. She'd wanted to record it, to share it with the world, but time had run out. Daniel reached into his backpack with hands that had stopped shaking. He pulled out the folded sheet music and spread it carefully on the piano's music stand. The paper was yellowed with age, the notes written in fading ink. Catherine's handwriting filled the margins. Slower here. More feeling. Pretend you're remembering something precious. Around him, the station continued its morning chaos. Trains announced arrivals and departures. Coffee vendors called out orders. Thousands of footsteps echoed off marble floors. Nobody was paying attention to the old guy at the piano. Daniel took a deep breath. Then he began to play. The first notes came out hesitant, unsure. His fingers stumbled a little, finding their way through music he'd only heard his wife play, never attempted himself. But something happened as he continued. The song started to take shape, to breathe, to become real. It was like Catherine was guiding his hands, showing him where to go, just like she'd tried to do all those years when he'd been too busy to listen. The melody was haunting. Sad but not depressing. Hopeful but not naive. It sounded like moonlight would sound if moonlight could sing. It sounded like memory and loss and love all wrapped up together. It sounded like something from another time, another world, a world that had somehow gotten lost. Daniel forgot about the train station. He forgot about his billions. He forgot about the life he'd left behind and the loneliness that had been crushing him since Catherine died. He forgot about everything except the music flowing through his fingers. This forgotten song that his wife had loved so much. This piece of beauty that the world had overlooked. He didn't notice when the first person stopped to listen. He didn't see the small crowd beginning to form. He didn't hear the whispers starting, the questions. Who is that? What is he playing? Why does it sound so sad and beautiful at the same time? Daniel just played, pouring 2 years of grief and 3 months of searching and 61 years of life into every note. This wasn't about showing off. This wasn't about being recognized. This was about keeping a promise he'd never actually made but felt in his bones. Someone should remember them. These songs deserved to be heard. The music filled the station, and for a few perfect moments the rushing stopped. People paused. They looked up from their phones. They listened, and Daniel played on, bringing his wife's favorite forgotten song back to life in a train station where nobody knew his name. The music changed something in the air. That's the only way to describe it. One moment Central Station was just another Tuesday morning, all rushing and stress and the mechanical voice announcing platform changes. The next moment something had shifted, like the whole building had taken a breath and held it. Daniel's fingers moved across the keys with a confidence that surprised him. The song was complex, full of unexpected turns and delicate passages that required real skill. But somehow his hands knew what to do. Maybe muscle memory from all those evenings watching Catherine play. Maybe something else, something he didn't want to think too hard about because it felt too much like magic. And men who'd built tech empires weren't supposed to believe in magic. But here he was, playing music he'd never properly learned. And it was working. A young mother had been rushing past, dragging her toddler by the hand when the melody caught her. She stopped so suddenly that her little boy stumbled. But she didn't notice. She just stood there frozen, her mouth slightly open. The child, sensing something important was happening, went quiet too. He stared at the man at the piano with wide eyes. Then a businessman in an expensive suit slowed his power walk. He was the type who probably hadn't missed a train in 20 years, who scheduled his life down to the minute, who thought being early meant you weren't trying hard enough. He checked his watch, frowned, looked at the departure board. His train was leaving in 3 minutes. He had a meeting across town. He stayed anyway. An elderly woman with a cane lowered herself carefully onto a nearby bench, wincing a little at the effort. But her face, when she settled, was peaceful. Almost transported, she closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. and years seemed to fall away from her expression. Within 5 minutes, maybe 30 people had formed a loose semicircle around the piano. They kept a respectful distance, like they were in a concert hall instead of a train station, like invisible rules had suddenly appeared telling them how to behave. Nobody spoke. A few whispered, but most just listened. Daniel was aware of them now, but only distantly, like they were part of a dream. He kept playing. The piece was 7 minutes long. Catherine had timed it once, and he was maybe 3 minutes in. The hardest part was coming, a cascade of notes that sounded like rain falling on water, each drop creating ripples that spread and overlapped. His fingers found the cascade. Somehow, impossibly, he played it correctly, or close enough. Maybe not perfect, but honest. That's what Catherine would have said. I don't care about perfect, Danny. I care about honest. She was the only person who'd ever called him Danny. Everyone else used his full name, formal and distant. Danny was who he'd been when they met, before the money and the success. Danny was who he'd stopped being somewhere along the way. In the crowd, phones were coming out. Daniel didn't see them, focused as he was on the music, but the phones were there. A teenage girl with purple streaks in her hair held up her camera, recording. She'd only stopped because the melody had cut through her podcast. Something so unusual that she'd actually pulled out her earbuds. Now she was capturing it. Instinct taking over. An older man, retired maybe, with kind eyes and calloused hands, stood perfectly still with his phone recording too. He'd been a music teacher once, 40 years in public schools, and he'd thought he'd heard everything. But this was something new. Or rather, something old that felt new. The composition itself spoke of another era, but played here now in this context. It was transformative. More people were gathering. 50 now, then 60. The semicircle was becoming a crowd. Some stood on tiptoes to see over others. A few climbed onto benches for a better view. Station security noticed the growing gathering and moved closer, worried about crowd control. But even they stopped when they got close enough to hear properly. The music was doing something to people. That sounds dramatic, but it was true. A college student who'd been up all night studying felt tears suddenly rolling down her cheeks and didn't even know why. A construction worker still in his high-vis vest found himself thinking about his daughter, who he hadn't spoken to in 3 years over some stupid argument he couldn't even remember the details of anymore. A nurse coming off a brutal night shift felt the exhaustion lift just a little, replaced by something she couldn't name but desperately needed. Daniel reached the quietest part of the piece now, so soft that people held their breath to hear it. His right hand picked out a melody that sounded like someone singing, while his left hand provided gentle, almost hesitant accompaniment. It was the section Catherine had loved most. She'd always closed her eyes when she played it, like she was somewhere else entirely. This is the part where Friedrich Müller was thinking about someone he loved. She'd told Daniel once. You can hear it in every note. That's longing. That's memory. That's wishing you could turn back time and say all the things you never said. Daniel understood that now in a way he hadn't when she was alive. He understood longing. He understood memory. He understood regret so deep it felt like drowning. The quiet section built slowly, carefully toward the finale. The tension increased with each measure. People in the crowd leaned forward unconsciously. The businessman checked his watch again, realized he'd now missed 2 trains and discovered he didn't care even a little bit. Then the finale arrived. It wasn't loud or showy. Friedrich Müller hadn't written that kind of ending. Instead, the song opened up like a flower, all the melodic threads that had been woven through the piece coming together in a moment of perfect clarity. It was resolution without being neat. It was an ending that felt like peace, like acceptance, like finally being able to breathe after holding your breath for too long. Daniel's hands moved through the final passages, and he felt something break open in his chest. Not break apart, break open, like he'd been carrying something heavy and tight inside him for 2 years, and the music was finally loosening it. The last notes hung in the air. He held the sustain pedal down, letting them fade naturally, unwilling to cut them short. The sound dissolved slowly into the ambient noise of the station, and for a moment there was perfect silence. Even the mechanical announcements seemed to have paused out of respect. Then the applause started. It wasn't polite golf clapping. It was real, genuine, enthusiastic applause. People were cheering. Some were crying openly now, not embarrassed about it. The construction worker was wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. The elderly woman on the bench was clapping with tears streaming down her face, and she was smiling like she just witnessed something holy. Daniel looked up, startled. He'd been so lost in the music that he'd genuinely forgotten where he was. The crowd was massive now, easily 100 people, maybe more. They were packed around the piano, filling the space, and they were all looking at him with expressions he couldn't quite read. Wonder maybe? Gratitude? Connection? He stood up quickly, suddenly overwhelmed. This wasn't what he'd intended. He just wanted to play the song, to honor Catherine, to give voice to Friedrich Müller's forgotten masterpiece. He hadn't meant to create a moment, but moments create themselves sometimes. You can't plan them. They just happen. Someone shouted, "What was that song?" Others echoed the question. "Play it again." "Who are you? Where did you learn that?" Daniel shook his head, grabbing his backpack. He carefully folded the sheet music and tucked it away. His hands were trembling again, but for a different reason now. He mumbled something about needing to catch his train, but his voice was too quiet and the crowd was too loud with questions and praise. He managed to squeeze through the people, most of whom stepped aside respectfully, though some tried to stop him to shake his hand or ask more questions. The teenage girl with purple hair called out, "Wait! I got it on video. What's your name?" But Daniel was already moving, head down, baseball cap pulled low. He disappeared into the stream of commuters heading toward the platforms, just another anonymous person in a sea of faces. Within 30 seconds, he'd vanished completely. Behind him, the crowd slowly dispersed, people reluctantly returning to their routines. But something had changed in them. They moved differently, walked slower, looked around more. The world hadn't actually changed, but they had, just a little. They'd been reminded that beauty could appear anywhere, that magic was real, that ordinary moments could become extraordinary without warning. The businessman made it to his next train, but he called his wife during the journey, just to tell her he loved her. The college student went home and slept, and when she woke up, she called her mom. The construction worker looked up his daughter's number and stared at it for 10 minutes before finally pressing call. And the teenage girl with purple hair opened her social media app, uploaded the video she'd recorded, and typed out a caption, "Mystery man at Central Station playing something I've never heard but can't stop listening to. Anyone know this song?" She hit post and put her phone away, thinking nothing of it. She had no idea what she'd just started. The video was 2 minutes and 43 seconds long. Not the whole performance, just the heart of it. The part where the melody soared and dipped and climbed again. The part where you could see people in the background stopping, turning, gathering. The part where the music was so clear and pure that it came through perfectly even on a phone's microphone. The teenage girl, whose name was Riley, posted it at 8:37 in the morning. By 9:15 it had 300 views. By 10 it was at 5,000. She was in her first period class when her phone started buzzing nonstop in her backpack, notifications coming so fast they became a constant vibration. Her teacher gave her a look. Riley silenced her phone, confused. She'd posted plenty of videos before. Usually they got like 20 views, mostly from her friends. What was different about this one? At lunch, she finally checked. 40,000 views. Her eyes went wide. The comments were flooding in faster than she could read them. What is this song? It's beautiful. I'm literally crying at my desk right now. Who is this man? Someone find him. This is the most beautiful thing I've heard in years. Shared this with my music professor. He's losing his mind trying to identify the piece. Riley sat there in the cafeteria, her lunch forgotten, watching the numbers climb. 50,000, 60,000. People were sharing it everywhere. It was jumping across platforms, spreading like wildfire. Someone had posted it to a classical music forum. Someone else had sent it to a music history professor at Yale. A popular music blogger with 2 million followers had just shared it with the caption, "This, listen to this. I have goosebumps." By the end of school, the video had 500,000 views. Daniel knew none of this. He'd spent the day the way he'd spent most days for the past few months. Walking through the city, sitting in a small cafe with a paperback book, watching people live their lives. He'd had a sandwich at a deli where the owner had argued with him about baseball. He'd helped a tourist find the museum district. He'd fed pigeons in a park, which he knew you weren't supposed to do but did anyway. He'd felt lighter somehow. Playing that song, honoring Catherine's memory that way, it had done something, released something. He'd been carrying grief like a stone in his chest, and while it wasn't gone, it felt different now. More manageable. less like it was crushing him. He'd gone back to his studio apartment as evening approached, heated up leftover soup, and sat by the window watching the city lights come on. He didn't own a TV. His phone was the cheap kind that made calls and not much else. He had no idea that millions of people were trying to figure out who he was. The video hit 1 million views at 6:32 that evening. By then, it had been picked up by news outlets. Not major ones yet, but local stations, music blogs, culture websites. Mystery pianist stuns train station with unknown classical piece, read one headline. The most beautiful song you've never heard, read another. Music experts were weighing in. A composer from Boston claimed it sounded like something from the German Romantic period. A pianist in London said the technique showed serious training. This wasn't some amateur. A music historian in Berlin was digging through archives, convinced she recognized the style but couldn't place it. Someone created a thread trying to identify the song. Within hours, it had thousands of comments. People were suggesting everything from Bach to Chopin to contemporary composers. Nobody got it right. Friedrich Müller's name appeared exactly once, buried deep in the comments posted by a doctoral student specializing in obscure 20th century composers. But it got lost in the noise. The video reached 5 million views by midnight. Riley had been interviewed by 3 online publications and 1 local news station. She told the story over and over. No, she didn't know who he was. Yes, the video was real, unedited. No, she hadn't seen him before. Yes, it was really that beautiful in person, maybe even more so. Her video wasn't the only one anymore. 12 other people had recorded the performance from different angles. They were all being posted, shared, analyzed. Someone had stitched together a compilation showing the crowd from multiple perspectives. You could see faces in that compilation. The businessman with tears in his eyes. The elderly woman's expression of pure joy. The construction worker standing perfectly still, transfixed. People were responding to more than just the music. They were responding to the whole thing. The ordinary setting. The anonymous performer. The way he'd just vanished afterward. In a world of social media stars and carefully crafted personal brands, here was someone who'd created something beautiful and asked for nothing in return. No followers, no likes, no monetization, just music, pure and simple. This is what we've lost, someone commented, and it got 50,000 likes. Art for art's sake. Beauty for beauty's sake. No agenda, no influencer pitch. Just a human being sharing something real. The internet was divided on who the mystery pianist might be. Some thought he was a music professor. Others guessed a concert pianist who'd retired. A few wild theories suggested he was actually famous, someone well-known doing a social experiment. That last theory was closer to the truth than anyone realized. But they were thinking of the wrong kind of famous. Day 2. The video crossed 20 million views. Major news outlets picked it up now. Morning shows ran segments on it. Who is the mystery train station pianist? Became a question everyone was asking. The search was on. People were combing through the footage, trying to identify anything about him. His clothes were generic, bought at any discount store. His backpack had no visible brands. His face was partially obscured by the hat and glasses, but someone would figure it out eventually. Someone always did. The music history professor in Berlin, a woman named Dr. Kristen Hoffman, had stayed up all night going through archives. She specialized in forgotten composers, musicians who'd been lost to history. Something about the piece nagged at her. The style, the structure, the way the melody developed. It felt familiar. At 4 a.m. she found it. A reference in an old catalog from the Munich Library of Performing Arts. Moonlit Reverie, Friedrich Müller, 1957. She'd heard of Müller, vaguely. A minor composer who'd died without recognition. She'd never heard any of his work performed. She immediately posted her findings. Within an hour, other researchers confirmed it. Sheet music was located in 3 different archives. Dr. Hoffman found a scratchy recording from 1958. The only known recording, made on equipment so primitive that the quality was nearly unlistenable. But the melody was there. It was definitely the same piece. The story grew. This wasn't just a beautiful performance. It was the resurrection of a forgotten masterpiece. Friedrich Müller's name started trending. His great-granddaughter, a 64-year-old woman named Greta living in Munich, woke up to find her inbox flooded with messages from journalists, researchers, and music lovers. She'd known her great-grandfather had been a composer, but she'd thought his work was lost. Her grandmother had mentioned it sometimes with sadness how talented he'd been, how he'd died bitter and broke. Greta had a single photograph of him, stern-faced in a cheap suit, holding some papers she'd always assumed were music. Now people were telling her that her great-grandfather's work was being heard by millions. That somewhere in the world, someone cared enough about his forgotten music to learn it, to perform it, to share it. She cried for an hour straight. Then she started going through her grandmother's old things, looking for anything connected to Friedrich. There had to be more somewhere. Letters maybe. Other compositions, something. The video hit 50 million views. A famous concert pianist announced she would perform Moonlit Reverie at her next recital, in honor of both Friedrich Müller and the mystery man who'd brought his work back to life. Symphony orchestras were requesting the sheet music. Music students were learning it. The scratchy 1958 recording was remastered as best as possible and released. It sounded thin and distant compared to the train station performance, which had somehow captured the soul of the piece in a way the original recording never had. And through all of this, Daniel walked through the city completely unaware. He bought coffee from the same vendor every morning. He nodded hello to his neighbors. He read books in the park. He was more at peace than he'd been in years. On day 3, he decided to go back to the train station. Not to play again, just to be there, to see the piano, to remember that moment of connection with Catherine and with something larger than himself. He pushed through the glass doors at his usual time, 8:15 in the morning. The station looked the same as always. People rushing, trains arriving, the same organized chaos, but something was different. There was a crowd around the piano, even though nobody was playing. People were taking pictures of it. A news crew was set up nearby, interviewing commuters. Daniel stopped, confused. He moved closer, carefully, staying on the edges of the crowd. Someone had left flowers on the piano bench. A handwritten sign was propped against the music stand. "Thank you, mystery pianist, for reminding us what beauty sounds like." His heart started beating faster. He pulled his cap lower, turned to leave. That's when he heard the voice. Daniel Chen?" He froze. Slowly, very slowly, he turned around. A man in an expensive suit was staring at him with his mouth open. Robert Yang, CEO of a rival tech company. They'd been competitors for 20 years, had grudgingly respected each other, had even had drinks together a few times at industry conferences. Robert's eyes went from confused to shocked to certain. "It is you. What are you doing here? Everyone thinks you're on some meditation retreat in Tibet or something." People were starting to stare. Not everyone recognized him, but some did. Heads turned. Phones came out. Someone gasped. Daniel's 3 months of anonymity were ending right there in Central Station, in almost the exact spot where he'd played his wife's favorite song. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd shared something real and honest, had asked for nothing in return, and somehow that had made him visible in a way his billions never had. The moment stretched out like taffy. Daniel stood there, his cheap backpack over one shoulder, his 3-day-old coffee stain still visible on his jacket, staring at Robert Yang while his brain tried to figure out what to do. Run, deny it, pretend to be someone else? But he was tired of pretending. That's why he'd left in the first place. "Hello, Robert," he said quietly. Robert's shock was melting into something else. Concern, maybe. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Are you okay? We've been worried. You're bored? They said you needed space, but nobody knew where you were. There were rumors you were sick or having some kind of breakdown or—" "I'm fine," Daniel said. And the strange thing was it was true. For the first time in years, it was actually true, but the damage was done. People around them were pulling out phones. The news crew nearby had noticed the commotion. A woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and a press badge was already moving toward them, her cameraman in tow. "Mr. Chen? Daniel Chen, the tech mogul?" Her voice cut through the station noise. "Are you the man who played the piano here 3 days ago?" More people were gathering now. Not a crowd yet, but getting there. Daniel could feel the walls closing in, the anonymity he'd carefully built dissolving like sugar in water. Robert was looking between Daniel and the reporter, piecing it together. His eyes went wide. "Wait, the video. The mystery pianist that everyone's talking about. That was you?" Daniel didn't answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. "Oh my God," Robert said. He started laughing, not mockingly but with genuine surprise. Daniel Chen, worth $3 billion playing piano in a train station in thrift store clothes. He shook his head. This is the most interesting thing you've ever done. The reporter was closer now, microphone extended. Mr. Chen, can you confirm you're the pianist from the viral video? The one who performed Friedrich Miller's Moonlit Reverie? Daniel looked at her, then at Robert, then at the growing circle of faces around them. Some were curious. Some were excited. Some just looked confused, not understanding why this scraggly guy in a baseball cap was suddenly interesting. He could lie, say it was a misunderstanding, disappear again. But then he thought about Catherine, about the promise he'd kept without meaning to, about Friedrich Miller's forgotten song reaching millions of people, about the construction worker who'd called his daughter, the businessman who'd missed his train, the elderly woman's tears of joy. Some things mattered more than privacy. Yes, he said simply. That was me. The reporter's eyes lit up. Why? Why would a billionaire CEO pretend to be homeless and play piano in a train station? I'm not pretending to be homeless, Daniel corrected, his voice gentle but firm. And I wasn't pretending anything. I was just being myself, maybe for the first time in a very long time. Someone in the crowd was recording now. Multiple people. This conversation would be online within minutes. There was no putting the genie back in the bottle. Robert was still staring at him with a mix of confusion and something that might have been admiration. You've been living like this? For how long? 3 months, Daniel said. A little more. Why? It was the question everyone wanted answered. Daniel could see it in their faces, all these strangers suddenly invested in his story. The reporter held her microphone closer, not wanting to miss a word. Daniel took a breath. My wife died 2 years ago. Cancer. After that, I just kept working. Threw myself into the company, made more money, made more deals, built a bigger empire. He paused. And I was completely empty inside. The money didn't mean anything. The success didn't mean anything. I'd forgotten who I was before all of it. The station had gone quieter around them. Even the rushing commuters were slowing down, sensing something real was happening. So I left. Rented a studio apartment. Started taking the train, doing my own laundry. He smiled a little. Turns out fabric softener is more complicated than running a tech company. A few people laughed. It broke the tension just enough. And the piano? The reporter asked. Why did you play? Daniel's expression shifted. Became softer, sadder. My wife was a pianist, a real one, trained, talented. She loved music, especially forgotten music. Songs nobody played anymore. She wanted to bring them back, to give them voice again. His voice caught. She died before she could. So I played her favorite piece for her. It was the least I could do, silence. Complete silence except for the distant sound of trains and announcements. The reporter looked like she might cry. That's beautiful. It was her beauty, not mine, Daniel said. I just borrowed it for a few minutes. Someone in the crowd called out, play it again. Others joined in. Yes, play now. We want to hear it. Please. Daniel shook his head. I can't, it wouldn't be the same. That moment was what it was because I wasn't trying to create a moment. I was just trying to remember my wife. The crowd looked disappointed but understanding. Somehow his refusal made them respect him more. Robert put a hand on Daniel's shoulder. You know you've started something, right? The video's been viewed by like 80 million people. They found the composer. His great-granddaughter has been doing interviews. Symphony orchestras are planning to perform it. Daniel's eyes widened. What? You don't know? You haven't been online at all? I have a flip phone, Daniel said, pulling it from his pocket like evidence. Makes calls. That's about it. Robert pulled out his smartphone and started showing Daniel. The video. The view count. The articles. Friedrich Miller's story. Greta's tearful interviews about her great-grandfather's music finally being recognized. The concert pianist learning the piece. Music students analyzing it. The global conversation about forgotten art and lost beauty. Daniel stared at the screen, overwhelmed. I just wanted to play a song. You did more than that, Robert said quietly. You reminded people that beauty matters, that art matters, that some things are worth doing just because they're worth doing. The reporter was still recording, getting all of this. Later, this conversation would be viewed millions of times. Daniel's simple honesty would strike a chord with people tired of curated perfection and artificial authenticity. But right now, In this moment, Daniel was just trying to process what he'd accidentally done. Catherine had wanted Friedrich Miller's music to be heard, and now it was, by millions, by symphony orchestras, by people all over the world who'd needed to hear something beautiful and didn't even know it. He felt something break open in his chest again, the same feeling he'd had while playing. But bigger this time, overwhelming. He realized he was crying right there in front of everyone, tears running down into his beard. "She would have loved this," he said, his voice breaking. "She would have been so happy." Robert didn't say anything, just kept his hand on Daniel's shoulder. The reporter lowered her microphone, knowing some moments were too sacred to interrupt. A woman in the crowd, middle-aged with kind eyes, stepped forward. She held out a tissue. "Your wife sounds like she was wonderful." Daniel took the tissue, nodded his thanks. "She was. She really was. My husband died last year," the woman said. "And I just want you to know that what you did, playing that song, it helped. I watched the video probably 50 times. It made me feel less alone." Others in the crowd murmured agreement. Someone else shared that they'd been going through a divorce and the music had given them a moment of peace. Another person said they'd played it for their terminally ill father, and he'd smiled for the first time in weeks. Stories poured out. The music had touched people in ways Daniel never could have imagined. A song written by a forgotten composer, played by a billionaire pretending to be nobody, had somehow reached into millions of lives and made them just a little bit better. "I don't know what to do now," Daniel admitted. "I can't go back to hiding, but I don't want to go back to my old life either." Robert thought for a moment. "So don't. Do something new. Something Catherine would have wanted." Daniel looked at him. "Like what?" "You just proved that forgotten beauty is worth remembering. That art matters even when nobody's watching. That music can change people." Robert gestured at the crowd, at the station, at the world beyond. "So do that. Make that your mission. Not for profit. Not for recognition. Just because it matters." Daniel stood there, surrounded by strangers who'd become something like friends, in a train station that had become something like home, holding a tissue from someone who understood grief. And for the first time since Catherine died, he felt purpose stirring. Not the hollow drive of making more money or closing more deals. Real purpose. The kind his wife had lived with every day. "Okay," he said quietly. Then louder, "Okay, I'll figure out how to do that." The crowd applauded. Not for his money or his success or his company. They applauded for his honesty, his grief, his willingness to let beauty matter more than image. Daniel Chen, billionaire, mystery pianist, grieving widower, wiped his eyes and smiled. It was time to stop hiding, but not because he'd been caught, because he'd finally remembered who he wanted to be. Daniel didn't go back to his penthouse apartment right away. That would have been the easy thing, the expected thing, slipping back into his old life like the past 3 months had never happened. But the easy thing wasn't always the right thing. He'd learned that much. Instead, he spent 2 more weeks in the studio apartment thinking, planning, figuring out what it meant to live with purpose instead of just success. The video had hit 120 million views by then. He was no longer anonymous, but that was okay. He'd never really wanted to be invisible. He'd wanted to be real. The interview at the train station had gone viral too. His words about Catherine, about grief, about emptiness and wealth, they'd resonated with people in a way his business accomplishments never had. Thousands of people reached out. Some shared their own stories of loss. Others thanked him for being honest. A surprising number said they'd also walked away from successful careers because they'd felt hollow inside, and his story had made them feel less alone. But the most important message came from Munich. From Greta, Friedrich Miller's great-granddaughter. She'd written to him through his company email, which his assistant had finally forwarded along with about 10,000 other messages. Her letter was simple and devastating. She thanked him for giving her great-grandfather the recognition he'd never received in life. She described finding old boxes in her grandmother's attic, filled with Friedrich's compositions, more than 60 pieces in total. Most had never been performed. She asked shyly if Daniel might know what to do with them. He read that letter 3 times, sitting on the floor of his studio apartment with tears streaming down his face. Catherine would have given anything to have found those compositions, would have spent years bringing them to life, so Daniel would do it for her. The Mueller Foundation was announced 6 weeks after the train station incident. Daniel's opening contribution was $50 million, with a commitment to add more as needed. The foundation's mission was simple: find forgotten composers, restore and preserve their work, commission new performances, and make sure beauty didn't die just because it was overlooked. But he did something else, something that made the announcement coverage emotional for everyone who'd followed his story. He named Catherine as co-founder. Her photograph was on the website, young and beautiful, sitting at a piano with that expression of pure concentration she always had when she played. The dedication read, "For Catherine, who taught me that every forgotten song deserves to be heard." He'd also given Greta a job, official title Director of Historical Recovery. Her first task was cataloging her great-grandfather's work. Her second was helping Daniel's team locate other forgotten composers, other lost treasures. The foundation's first concert was scheduled for 3 months later, at a mid-sized venue in the city. All of Friedrich Müller's known compositions would be performed by professional musicians. Tickets were free, though you had to register in advance. They were gone in 4 minutes. Daniel attended, of course, not in a tuxedo in a private box, but in the audience, sitting next to Greta and her family. When the pianist began Moonlit Reverie, Daniel closed his eyes and let the music wash over him. It was different from his train station performance, more polished, more technically perfect, but no less beautiful. Greta leaned over and whispered, "He would have loved knowing people finally heard his music." Daniel whispered back, "So would Catherine." The applause when the piece ended was thunderous. The pianist took their bows, but then did something unexpected. They gestured to Daniel in the audience and started clapping. Soon everyone was standing, applauding him. Daniel stood awkwardly, unused to this kind of attention for something real, but he nodded his thanks and meant it. The foundation grew quickly. More forgotten composers were identified. Music that had been lost for decades, sometimes centuries, was being performed again. Daniel's team worked with musicologists, archivists, and historians around the world. Every month brought new discoveries, but Daniel made sure the foundation stayed focused on what mattered. This wasn't about making money or building another empire. Some things his team found belonged in archives, studied but not performed. Some deserved full orchestral treatment. Others worked better in intimate settings, coffee shops and small venues where people could experience them without pretense. The foundation funded music education too, scholarships for students who wanted to study composition or music history. It supported living composers whose work was being overlooked. It created grants for community music programs. And every year, on the anniversary of Catherine's death, Daniel would perform at a random public location. Sometimes a train station, sometimes a park, sometimes a hospital waiting room. He never announced it beforehand. He would just show up, sit down at whatever piano was available, and play something from the foundation's collection. People started calling them beauty drops, these unexpected moments of grace. Videos would surface online afterward, never from Daniel himself, always from surprised witnesses. The foundation never promoted them. That wasn't the point. The point was that beauty should appear without warning, without price, without conditions. Daniel did eventually go back to his company, but as a different kind of leader. He still made decisions, still attended meetings, but he also instituted changes that seemed strange for a tech CEO. Every Friday, the offices were open to any employee who wanted to share a hidden talent. Not team-building exercises or corporate-mandated fun, just real voluntary sharing. The accountant who wrote poetry, the programmer who did woodworking, the marketing manager who was secretly an incredible baker. At first, people thought it was weird. Then they started participating. Then they started looking forward to it. The office culture shifted. People felt more human at work, less like cogs in a machine. Daniel's board of directors thought he'd lost his mind. His company's stock price initially dipped, but then something interesting happened. Employee retention soared. Creativity increased. The best talent wanted to work there, not just for salary, but for culture. Within a year, the company was more profitable than ever. Turns out, Daniel said in an interview, when you treat people like humans instead of resources, they do better work. Took me $3 billion and a train station piano to figure that out. The interview went viral too. Business schools started studying his approach. Other CEOs began experimenting with similar ideas. Not all of them succeeded. Some just put up superficial imitations. But some got it. Really got it. and workplace culture started shifting in small pockets across the corporate world. Robert Yang, his former competitor, became his close friend. They met for lunch every few weeks, not to talk business, but to talk about life, meaning the things that actually mattered. Robert admitted that watching Daniel's transformation had made him question his own choices. He'd started volunteering at a youth center, teaching kids about entrepreneurship. It wasn't changing the world, but it was changing a few kids' worlds, and that felt more important than he'd expected. "You ruined me," Robert joked over coffee one day. "I used to be perfectly happy making money and playing golf. Now I keep thinking about legacy and meaning and impact. It's exhausting," Daniel laughed. "Good. Welcome to being human." The train station where it all started became a landmark of sorts. The piano was still there and people still played it, though now there was a small plaque. It didn't mention Daniel by name. It just said, "In memory of all the forgotten artists whose beauty deserves to be heard." Daniel visited sometimes just to sit and listen to whoever was playing. Mostly beginners, people pecking out simple songs, making mistakes, laughing at themselves. It was perfect. Art didn't have to be polished to matter. It just had to be honest. One day, about 2 years after his train station performance, Daniel was sitting on a bench watching a teenager struggle through a simple piece. The kid was frustrated, kept starting over, couldn't get the rhythm right. Daniel walked over quietly. "Mind if I show you something?" The teenager looked up, didn't recognize him despite everything. "Sure, I guess." Daniel sat down and demonstrated the passage, slowly showing the rhythm. Then he let the kid try. Better, but still not quite there. "Don't think so hard about the notes," Daniel said. "Think about what feeling you're trying to create. The notes are just tools. The feeling is the point." The teenager tried again. This time it clicked. The passage flowed, sounded almost musical. "There you go," Daniel said, smiling. "You've got it." "Thanks, man." The kid went back to practicing, lost in the music. Daniel returned to his bench, watched for a few more minutes, then headed out to catch his train. He still took public transportation most days. Still lived relatively simply, though he'd upgraded from the studio to a modest 2-bedroom. Mostly because he needed space for Catherine's piano, which he'd moved from the penthouse. He played every morning now. Sometimes her favorite pieces. Sometimes the new forgotten works the foundation had discovered. Sometimes he just improvised, letting his fingers find their own way. The grief hadn't gone away, probably never would, but it had transformed into something else. Not pain exactly, but memory. Presence. Catherine was gone, but what she'd cared about was alive in the world, growing, spreading, touching people she'd never met. That felt like the best kind of memorial. Not a statue or a building with her name on it, but beauty, recurring and renewable, appearing in unexpected places, reminding people that there was more to life than rushing from one obligation to the next. On the 5-year anniversary of the train station performance, the foundation held a special concert. 50 forgotten compositions, performed by musicians from around the world. Friedrich Miller's complete works, yes, but also pieces from composers discovered through the foundation's work. Japanese, Nigerian, Brazilian, indigenous, Australian. Beauty that had almost been lost. The concert was broadcast globally, free to anyone who wanted to watch. 300 million people tuned in. Daniel watched from home, Catherine's piano behind him, a glass of wine in his hand. He thought about the businessman who'd missed his train, the elderly woman with tears in her eyes, the construction worker who'd called his daughter, all the small moments his accidental performance had created. He thought about Friedrich Müller, dying broke and forgotten, never knowing his music would one day reach hundreds of millions. He thought about Catherine, who'd believed that beauty mattered even when nobody was watching, and he thought about himself, a billionaire who'd had to lose everything that didn't matter to find the one thing that did.